The long dusk. I was built the year the river froze so hard that wagon wheels crossed it without cracking the ice. My stones are the color of storm clouds, mortared with mud and the breath of masons who sang psalms to keep their fingers from numbing. They set me on a rise where two fir trees lean together like conspirators, hence the name folk gave me, Two Firs. From the ridge I stare down into the valley, and the valley stares back, green in summer, iron grey in winter, always hungry. The first snow had not yet fallen when Margot arrived, but the wind carried its scent the way a wolf carries blood on its muzzle. She came in a cart, drawn by a black ox whose shoulders steamed. Behind her walked Henrik, reins looped loose in his fist, his beard already rimmed with frost, though the sun had hours left to travel. He was whistling a fertility tune, the same 3 notes repeated like the knock of a heart. Every step he took pressed the memory of his boots deeper into my threshold. Inside, I had been swept clean, the hearth gaped, waiting for flame, and the single window shutter swung open so the last light could inspect the bed. A straw tick 3 fingers thick, covered by a goatskin blanket, dark with the oils of other bodies. The rushes, fresh that morning, smelled of river and rot, the smell of beginnings. Margot paused on the sill, one hand on the doorpost as if testing the grain. She was 15, but the weight she carried made her seem older, the way saplings bend when wet snow clings to their needles. In her right fist she clutched the shift, undyed wool, so coarse it could raise blisters, folded small as a prayer book. 3 nights earlier her mother had unfolded it on the table, smoothing the creases while tears dropped onto the cloth like hot wax. Wear it as they wore it, she'd said. It remembers how to endure. Margot's shoes, wooden patterns crusted with dung, she set neatly by the door. That was the first mercy she allowed herself, not to track the barnyard into the room where she would become a wife. Then she knelt, knees sinking into the rushes, and began to coax the fire. Her fingers trembled so violently, the flint slipped twice before the tinder caught. I felt the spark pass through the kindling, a small exultation. Fire is a tenant that never forgets its first lodging. The guests of Ember Eve. They came at twilight, as custom demanded, carrying noise like a banner. 8 men, 2 women, and a boy with a drum made from an old sieve. Their boots thudded on my packed earth floor. Their breath clouded the air. Someone had brought a lil in a skin that leaked, leaving a trail of sweetness for the dog to lick afterward. They sang the bedding song, not the one the priest taught, but the older version, the one with verses about ploughing and harvest, about seed that must be driven deep if the earth is to yield. The women stripped Margot with the efficiency of midwives, lifting the wool over her head so her hair spilled down like unshorn flax. She kept her eyes fixed on the rafters where a single wren had once nested. The bird was gone, but the straw it left still clung to the beam. Henrik endured the same handling, though he grinned, showing the gap where a tooth had been knocked out by a neighbor's scythe. When the shift dropped over her again, now his property, the fabric caught on the callus of his thumb, and for a moment the room held its breath, as if the cloth itself protested. Then came the procession. The boy with the sieve drum leading, the women flanking Margot, the men flanking Henrik. Outside the sky had gone the color of bruised plums. Torches made from pitch pine hissed in the wind. Someone beat on a copper pot until the sound rang against the hillside and came back changed, thinner, like the echo of a scream. They circled the cottage 3 times, sunwise, always sunwise, before pushing the couple across the threshold. The door slammed, the bar dropped. The torches withdrew, but the watchers stayed, shadows pressed to the shutters, ears sharpened for the sound that would make them roar approval and tramp home satisfied. Unadmit. The silence between heartbeats. Inside, the candle was new, its wick still white. Hendrik lit it from the hearth, cupping the flame with hands big enough to span a lamb's ribcage. By that small light, Margot saw what she had not seen before: the cracks between the stones stuffed with moss to keep out wind, the hook where a cradle would eventually hang, the dark patch on the floor where Hendrik's first wife had died, giving birth to a child that never cried. The knowledge settled on her like damp wool. He began with the cord at her throat, slow, as if untying a calf for market. The shift slipped from her shoulder, revealing skin goose-fleshed from cold and fear. She thought absurdly of the chickens she had plucked that morning, how the feathers came away in clumps, leaving the flesh raw and pink. Henrik's breath smelled of onion and ale. It warmed her cheek. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped, as though remembering its place. She did not resist. Resistance, her mother had said, only makes the knot tighter. Instead, she counted 1 for the stone that jutted into her spine, 2 for the drip of melted tallow on the shelf, 3 for the grunt Henrik made when he lifted her hips to position her the way the priest had drawn with a stick in the dust. Man above, woman below, face to face, so their souls would not wander and meet the devil in the dark. After 7 counts her mind blurred. The rafters swung like a ship's mast, and she was glad of the dark that rose up to swallow her. IV. The blood speaks. When it was finished, Henrik rolled aside and began to snore, a thick sound like water gurgling through a reed. Margot lay still, feeling the wetness seep between her thighs. She waited for pain, but pain was a luxury the poor could not always afford. What she felt was a hollow ringing, as though someone had struck her ribs and the note would never fade. Carefully, she slid from the bed and knelt again, this time on the flagstone near the hearth, where the floor was warmest. She dipped her fingers in the ashes and drew a small circle, the size of a newborn's crown. Inside it she placed 3 drops of blood from the shift, not enough to stain the sheets for display. She would prick her finger later for that, but enough to feed the fire to make it remember. The flame accepted the offering, flaring blue before settling back to steady gold. In its light she saw the future. 9 months hence, a child with Henrik's brow and her own stubborn chin. The year after, another child who would die before baptism. The year after that, the plague that would take Henrik but spare her, leaving her the cottage, the half-acre, the 3 pigs grown fat on grief. She saw herself at 30, hair-streaked grey, teaching her daughter to count the days between bleeding and the moon. She saw the daughter, in turn, fold the same shift for her own wedding night, the wool thinner now, almost transparent with wear, yet still potent with the memory of every woman who had endured its scratch. The watchers withdraw. Outside, the watchers heard no scream. What they heard was a long, shuddering sigh, part relief, part resignation, and it satisfied them. One by one they drifted away, torches bobbing down the path like fireflies. The boy with the sieve drum lingered longest, staring at the shutter, as if hoping it might open and reveal some marvel. When it did not, he tapped the drum once, softly, a secret question. No answer came. He left the stick leaning against my wall, where the frost would warp it by morning. Inside, Margot rose. She rinsed the shift in the bucket by the door, wringing until the water ran pink, then clear. She spread it on the hearth to dry, smoothing the fabric with the heel of her hand, each stroke a promise. I will not forget. I will not forgive. I will endure. Henrik snored on, one arm flung across the bed like a claim. She studied his face. The broken tooth, the scar on his eyebrow, the way his beard grew unevenly on the left side, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not hate, but a fierce, practical tenderness, the kind a farmer feels for a difficult ewe that still gives good wool. The cottage remembers. When the cock crowed, they rose. Henrik stretched, scratched his belly, and went out to piss against the elder tree. Margot rebuilt the fire, added water to last night's porridge, sliced an onion so thin you could read the morning light through it. The shift, now dry, she folded into thirds and tucked beneath the mattress. It would stay there until her daughter needed it, and after that her granddaughter, and so on, until the fabric finally gave way and became bandages for a birthing bed. I have watched this cycle 7 times since that night. I have seen the shift torn by childbirth, mended with nettle thread, stained by placenta and by tears. I have seen it used as a shroud for a babe too small to name, then washed and worn again, because wool endures when people do not. Each woman who wore it added her own stitch, a red thread for luck, a blue one for sorrow, a tiny knot of horsehair to bind the next generation to the land. The cloth grew heavy with stories, until it hung in the air like a second skin, invisible to men, but palpable to any woman who crossed the threshold. The seasons turn. Spring came early that year. The barley Henrik planted sprouted in uneven rows, as if uncertain whether it was safe to rise. Margot learned the rhythm of the fields, the ache of bending, the sweet itch of chaff on her wrists, the way rain smelled different when you stood under it all day instead of watching from a window. At night she lay beside Henrik and listened to his breathing change, slow at first, then quickening as he dreamed of wolves. She discovered that if she moved her hip a certain way, he would grunt and roll over, giving her the warm half of the bed. It was a small victory, but victories were measured small then. Summer brought the first child. She labored in the same bed where she had once been a bride, the shift now a sling to cradle her belly. The village midwife arrived with herbs and a bone needle to pierce the pain. Henrik waited outside, sharpening his scythe, pretending the sound of metal on stone could drown out the animal noises within. When the cry came, thin and fierce as a hawk's, he did not weep. Men did not weep. But he laid the scythe down carefully, as if it were made of glass, and went to the barn to milk the goat, because someone had to do it. The child was a girl. They named her Lisi, after Henrik's mother, who had died coughing blood into snow. Margot wrapped her in a square of the shift's hem, cut away and hemmed fresh. The wool smelled of smoke and milk, and something older, like the inside of a church bell. When she nursed, Lisi's fist clutched a fold of the fabric as if she knew it was her inheritance. The Fad, the plague year. In the autumn of Lisi's 3rd year, the pestilence arrived on the back of a peddler's cart. It moved through the valley like a black wind, stripping families faster than frost strips leaves. Henrik fell first, fever painting his cheeks the color of poppies. Margot nursed him with onion poultices and prayers whispered into the shift, now worn thin as cobweb. She buried him on the hill where the 2 firs stand sentinel, marking the grave with his scythe blade driven into the earth. The priest refused to come. He was too busy burying his own, so she sang the requiem herself, her voice steady as a plough-line. The harvest rotted in the fields. No hands remained to gather it. Pigs roamed wild, rooting among the barley stubble. Margot and Lisi survived on nettle soup and the last of the winter apples. When the worst had passed, they were 2 of 17 souls left in the valley. The cottage stood empty around them, echoing with the absence of voices. Yet the shift endured, washed in lye until the fibers shone, folded and refolded until the creases were soft as lips. But a turn of the circle. Years later, when Lisi stood in the same doorway clutching the same shift, Margot watched with the detached tenderness of a woman who has outlived her own pain. The groom was a cooper's son from the next valley, gentle in the way of men who have learned early that wood splits along its own grain. The bedding ceremony was quieter now, only 6 torches and no drum, but the song was the same. Lisi did not cry. She had grown up hearing the creak of her mother's loom at night, the rhythmic thud of the shuttle like a heartbeat counting down. She knew what was required. Afterward, Margot found her daughter kneeling by the hearth, drawing the same small circle in ash. Into it, Lizzie placed 3 drops of blood, but she added something new, a single seed of barley saved from the year of the plague. For memory, she said. Margot nodded, understanding. Memory was the only dowry they could truly give. The cottage dreams. I have stood here 300 years since that night. The firs have grown tall enough to scrape the sky. Their roots have lifted 2 of my stones like a shrug. Lizzie's daughters and their daughters have worn the shift until it is less cloth than constellation, threads of light, mapping every woman who ever bled beneath my roof. The barley seed sprouted and grew wild, white heads nodding each summer like a congregation of ghosts. Some nights, when the moon is thin and the wind shifts east, I dream of Margot. She stands barefoot on the threshold, 15 again, the shift clutched in her fist. She looks at me, not through me, and whispers, "We endure." Then she steps inside, and the door closes with the soft finality of snow falling on water. In the morning, the dream is gone, but a faint warmth lingers in the stones, as if a heart had pressed against them all night. XI. Epilogue. The Last Keeper. The last of the line was named Agnete. She was born in 1621, the year the comet hung over Europe like a sword. She never married, said she preferred the company of bees, but she kept the shift, mending it with silk thread stolen from the priest's vestments. When she died, childless, the cottage passed to strangers. They found the shift folded inside a chest, so fragile it dissolved at a touch, leaving only a faint rust stain on the wood. They burned the chest for kindling, not knowing what they burned. Yet I remember. Stones remember the way rivers remember, by erosion, by slow accretion, by the stories they carry in their bellies. On winter nights, when the wind howls down the valley and the new owners huddle around their iron stove, I hear the echo of a girl's voice. Mercy. The word circles the rafters like a swallow, soft and tireless. It is not a plea anymore. It is a promise. And so I stand. 2 firs crooked but unbroken. My roof sags, my door no longer fits its frame, but the threshold is still worn smooth by the passage of women, some barefoot, some in pattens, all carrying invisible burdens heavier than any dowry. Each leaves behind a drop of memory, a thread of song, a whisper of ash. Together they weave a tapestry no fire can consume, the testament that once in a year when the world was ending, a girl stood in a doorway and chose to endure.